Hello, lovelies. Today we're taking a look at the Devil's Run role-playing game core book. I picked this up for a tenner from Nightfall, I think, which seems weird because Nightfall isn't mentioned on the cover anywhere, and clearly this was an overstock, or they wildly overestimated the amount of people who'd be interested in their book, because it's 300 pages. It's not slim. It's hardcover. It's full color all the way through. So the only thing I can think of is that it just didn't do as well as they were hoping, because this must be being sold basically at cost, I would think, at this point. Shipping was a bit expensive, but still, if you want to get hold of a post-apocalyptic vehicle-based rule set for 2D20, then it's a fair bargain. Apparently it's based on a board game that I'd never heard of. A quick Google around showed that the board game has some fairly nice little cars and things for it, but I've got Gaslands, and I still have Dark Future somewhere, and I also have Car Wars somewhere. So I've got enough skirmishy car games, but not role-playing games. I did make a set of rules for Mad Max style stuff using Fate, Fatal Highway. So it's a genre I like, and what with Furiosa and everything, I think that kind of tipped me over the edge to getting this. Plus, I primarily bought this due to a high degree of dissatisfaction with the vehicle rules in the Wanderer's Guide for Fallout. Now, obviously, in the Fallout computer games, cars, vehicles aren't a huge thing. I guess vertibirds in Fallout 4 and the Highwaymen in Fallout 2, but they're not hugely involved vehicle rules, and for the most part, you're just slogging it around on foot in Fallout games. But I wanted to involve vehicles because I'm a contrarian. And again, I was just dissatisfied with the rules in the Wanderer's Guide, and so this seemed like a good substitution or addition, I would say. As I say, it only cost me a tenner. It's somewhat dual-statted for Savage Worlds, though not as completely as it is for 2D20. I'm less keen on Savage Worlds, which is weird because I really liked Deadlands and I really liked Wasted West, and the rule system worked really well for those. But somehow I've just never managed to really kind of grapple with Savage Worlds outside of those contexts. Some people are really enthusiastic about it. I don't know, it just never really gelled for me. Maybe the new edition will, I don't know. So, the setting for this game is your kind of somewhat standard issue post-apocalypse. There was a nuclear war, there was chemical warfare that made zombies. Everyone's driving around Mad Max style, but with guns and things strapped to their vehicles as well. So the game world is all a bit gonzo, and it doesn't really take itself particularly seriously. This is much more Blood Drive or Escape from LA than it is Mad Max. I mean, Mad Max has its moments, but Miller always insisted the cars and vehicles and so on somewhat made sense and all actually worked. In Mad Max, none of the vehicles really have weapons on them per se, but in this, you're loading up your cars like you would in Car Wars or Battle Cars or similar, so your vehicles do have weapons. So if you were looking to recreate Mad Max, this isn't quite it, unless you strip back the rule system quite a lot. The game is set on the west coast of America, in and around San Francisco. There's a whole bunch of different themed gangs, some of which don't particularly make a lot of sense. They make sense for a board game where you want a really sort of strong visual and stylistic differentiation between different gangs, but for a role-playing game, they do feel rather cartoonish, unfortunately. So yeah, not something you can particularly take that seriously, which sounds like a really weird thing to say about a sort of gonzo post-apocalypse game, very much inspired by Mad Max and so on, but it is nonetheless true. The Vikers, who are sort of Viking bikers, are probably some of my favourites, though the artwork for them is a bit Space Wolves on occasion. This is a complete 2D20 rule set. It is interesting that we're starting to see more independent stuff produced for 2D20, though I'm not sure if I would ever do that necessarily. I mean, it is nice that there's an audience and it's a Britain-originated RPG system, but it's I don't know, we're enjoying Fallout, but it's just not quite my thing, I guess. But I really, like I say, I really bought this for the vehicle rules, and that's the part that interests me. It is a complete game, though, so if you wanted to pick up a 2D20 game system on the cheap, and you wanted a sort of modern or post-apocalyptic system, again, on the cheap, it's a pretty good buy for that, if you're willing to kit bash everything that's here to an extent. Most of this is familiar 2D20 type stuff, and it's on the crunchier end of 2D20, so it's closer to the Fallout rule set than it is, say, the Dune rule set, which is much more highly abstracted, even though both are 2D20 rule sets. It lacks some of the concentration on character depth and so on that other 2D20 rule sets have, and it doesn't have the same degree of, say, weapon customization that the Fallout 2D20 rule set has, but it does have a good focus on vehicles and chases and vehicle modifications and so on, as you would expect it to. It's perhaps not quite as in-depth as I would have wanted on the vehicle customization, and there's a few problems with some of the vehicle rules. Like, there isn't a limit listed on how many times you can take the turbocharged trait on a vehicle. So in theory, if you had the money or the salvage, you could just keep adding and adding and adding turbocharged speed onto your vehicle until it broke the speed of light, presumably. But you know, any good games master worth their salt knows to make some additional restrictions and so on, or to compensate for things that the creators missed. So yeah, it's not too bad, but it does give the vehicles the kind of depth of crunch that the weapons have in the Fallout rule set. So if you take this and you put it alongside your Fallout game and you make a few adjustments here and there, this will add a much better dimension to Fallout or any other 2D20 game that you want to throw vehicles into a bit more firmly. There are a few differences. Vehicles in these rules have about half as many hit points as the same vehicles would in the Fallout rule set. In Fallout, vehicles have hit locations. They don't in this, but that's not too difficult to sort out. The scale of the vehicles is different. It's off by about 1, but that's nothing that can't be overcome, and it's not too relevant most of the time. If you don't want to play on boards and grids and so on, which 2D20 typically doesn't, so why would you? There are rules for that. There are more abstracted rules for car chases, which work pretty much the same way I have written chase rules for anything that I've written. So, you basically just keep track of distance between 0 and 5, some other factors that might be going on, and that determines how far away you are from each other and whether someone manages to escape or not from the chase. So, considering I've written rules that are essentially the same as what's in here, I can't really complain about that. So yeah, it's a perfectly cromulent rule set for vehicles, giving them the same depth that weapons scavenging and so on does in the Fallout game, for example. I keep drawing that comparison because that's what I bought this for, and they're both post-apocalyptic games. So what do I think then? Well, in terms of style, it's all fairly readable. It's fairly clear that a lot of this art is recycled from the board game and its various doodads, widgets and gubbins. It does suffer badly from the muddiness and the lack of clarity, the lack of vibrance, saturation and contrast that so much modern RPG art has. You can forgive that a little more in this setting because it's post-apocalyptic, so everything should have a layer of grunge and grime on it. But the artwork overall is wildly different. There's some of it that looks like it's by the comic artist Clint, but isn't. And there's other stuff which just isn't quite there, but could be. I think the artists they have just need to put a bit more work in. Some of them, some of it's really good, some of it's passable. A lot of it is just kind of meh, and some of it, the proportions, the colouring, things like that, just aren't up to snuff. Now, obviously, I understand very much. You make games on a budget. It can be difficult, but you kind of have to judge what's put in front of you. I almost would have preferred all the artwork to be black and white, and a lot of line art and so on. Perhaps with a colour page background, not dissimilar to what they have here. That might have been more striking visually, but then you'd be paying full colour printing prices for black and white art. So I don't know, maybe not. I don't know. It might have worked better, cleaner lines. Everything's slightly fuzzy. Well, not everything. Almost everything is a bit fuzzy. But maybe that's just the incipient cataracts. I don't know. So style, I mean, it's an independent group of people, but they're making 2D20 games. And Modiphius is mentioned on the cover, Savage Worlds is mentioned on the cover, Sold Through Nightfall, who are a very art-oriented company, with Dave Alsop in amongst them. Whether they just picked up spare copies or whatever, I don't know, or they did a distribution deal or something. I don't know. I don't know the board game either. I mean, the board game looks nice. The minis look quite nice. But I've got to judge this as it is, and I can't really justify giving it above a 3 for style. I found many of the gangs and so on to be a bit cringe, or not to make a great deal of sense, unfortunately. Even within the game world itself, it's a bit of a case of style over substance. My plausibility sense, it just doesn't really hang together stylistically, and there's quite a bit of purple prose and mini fiction and so on in the book as well, which I'm just not a fan of. These things may not mean anything to you, but for me it does. And I have a massive hate on for muddy artwork, even though it's more justified here. If it wasn't justified here, I'd have dropped the style to a high 2, but as it is, it scrapes a 3. In terms of substance, I mean, it does what I wanted it to do, which is to have decent vehicle rules that I could then import to other 2D20 games, particularly Fallout. So it does that, and that's great. The card chase rules and everything, that's what I bought it for. That's all fantastic. The rest of it, I mean, it's a 2D20 rule set with some Savage Worlds information here and there. It's a complete game. So yeah, clearly it's going to score at least an average. But because it does the vehicle rules so well, viewing it as a supplement for other games, I think it just scrapes a 4 in terms of substance. Because while the vehicle rules are great, that's only a small portion of the game book overall. So that is a low 3 for style, a low 4 for substance. That is 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5, maybe as high as a 3.75 out of 5. If you need vehicle rules for a 2D20 game, concentrating on the sort of car, truck, motorbike sort of scale, definitely worth picking up, especially as it's cheap through Nightfall. A tenner plus too much for shipping, but given current RPG book prices, it's still a bit of a steal. And definitely food for thought. So for me, it was worth getting. Your mileage may vary. It depends on what games you're running. But if you wanted to kit bash together a Mad Max game, this and Fallout, and you're pretty much set. Zang.
Hi, I'm Skip Breakfast, and you're watching Newsload. We're getting reports of a new card game which purports to make fun of the political and social hellscape in which we find ourselves, somehow turning this into a fun pastime for groups of slightly drunken friends to try and outdo each other. But there's one important question on everyone's lips: just how exactly do you play?